back. WNST, Towson, Baltimore, and WNST.net. Amidst the Terps losing over the weekend and the C.J. Mosley video in the snow and the Alex Collins in the snowbank and getting caught, all that stuff, the Orioles are playing baseball over the weekend, and there are occasions when the nice folks in the Angelos family decide to put something on their two lousy television networks that we pay a lot of money for, and once in a while it is Orioles baseball. Luke Jones joins us now to discuss all things grapefruit and the Orioles and, another opportunity to watch Chris Davis strike out, huh?
So we're starting off with that, right?
Yeah. Well, he does make the most amount of money. That is the biggest question mark on the team. They owe him another $100 million. So it's probably not a bad place to start because it is, I guess, amongst the fans, they think somehow he's going to come back and hit 221 this year. I've never really seen that done. And the offseason and the stuff that he says and the way he says it and the body language, and it just feels to me like he's in over his head, they're in over their head, and he's just a washed-up baseball player.
Yeah, it's hard to combat that line of thinking. It really is. You just mentioned as far as you haven't seen too often someone come back from this. Well, we haven't seen too often someone have the kind of season that he had in 2018.
McGuire had a real stinker in there amidst all of it. He's the only guy, and I've been watching baseball a long time, that sort of resurrected himself from that. And, of course, he used needles to do it.
I was going to say, right.
As it's been, further pointed out here. But Mark McGuire, just to do a little baseball history, in 1991, Mark McGuire was, at that point, let's see what year he was born, 63. So in 1991, he was 28 years old. And he had, been Mark McGuire, 49, 32, 33, all those home runs. And then that year he hit 201 with 22 home runs in 585 at-bats. That was, to me, of all the years, forget Kingman and the guy, Gorman Thomas and the guys that only did that. Chris Davis wasn't an only did that kind of guy. Much like McGuire, he walked a lot, right? McGuire had 130 walks a year every year. Even in that year where he hit 201, he walked 110 times, 93 times that year. So the OBP was almost 400. He was 370 OBP that year. But from the history of baseball, he's the only guy I remember that had that kind of a year and came back and resurrected himself. And, Chris Davis, here we go, right?
Yeah, the problem is, Nestor, what you just described pales compared to what Chris Davis just did in 2018.
Sure.
Mark McGuire, because of what you just said,
201 would be a bounce-back year for him this year.
Right. Mark McGuire still had a 714 OPS that year, which isn't good, don't get me wrong, but it's not in the historically poor category that Chris Davis, his 539 OPS.
Dude, we've never seen anything like Chris Davis last year because no team would have left him on the team, right? That's literally the reason why in any other era of baseball they would have cut their losses with the guy.
Right, but in fairness, and look, we can debate, and we've continued to debate, and we've debated for a long time now how wise that contract was, but no one that's had that kind of contract has had that kind of a season. To your point, if this were a guy that was in his last year of arbitration or in the third year of a 4-year, $20 million contract or something like that, he would have been long gone. He would have been gone, might have been gone in 2017 even, when he didn't have a good year. So I think to bring it back to the present day, we know he has 4 years left on his contract. I think as it stands right now, we know the Orioles aren't winning this year. I think we all know that. So from a standpoint of wins and losses in the standings, it's inconsequential, but you get to the point of when will he be blocking someone. It's one thing to talk about right now where Trey Mancini's kind of been hanging out in left field. Trumbo's still on the team. He's in his final year of his contract. So he's presumably going to be the DH, at least to start the year. You hope you can deal him at some point if he proves he's healthy with the knee. But you also have Ryan Mountcastle, who's been playing first base this spring, primarily first base this spring. He's played a little bit at third base still, but he's coming, and he needs some more time. He'll be at AAA this year, so it's not as though he's blocked right now, but everyone you talk to in the organization, whether it's minor league coaches or scouts, anyone, Baseball America, anyone who's followed Ryan Mountcastle, everyone is confident that he's going to hit at the major league level. The question has been, where is he going to play? So if it gets to the point where, all right, Chris Davis is not any better, and so far in his first handful of spring training at-bats, 1 for 12 with a home run and 7 strikeouts. I mean, sounds very similar, doesn't it? Sounds very familiar, very much like what we heard last year for the entire season. So you get to a point where you have Trey Mancini, you have Ryan Mountcastle ready to go, maybe as early as midway through the season. Who knows? At what point does this organization now, with a general manager and a manager who have no ties to Chris Davis, they had nothing to do with the Chris Davis that was hitting 50 home runs a year.
He's just a guy on the team that they have at-bats for, or they don't have at-bats for. Right.
So that's where, to me, it will become an issue of, does he play at all? And then, of course, the bigger issue, and this is going to be whether it's this year, next year, year after that, whatever, when they, from a financial standpoint, say, this is a complete lost cause, we're paying him the money either way, but this isn't even a competent major league hitter anymore. When does that happen?
1,000 at-bats? How many at-bats do we need?
I don't know. I don't know if it's that many.
He's already had 600, incompetent at-bats, right?
Sure. Even go back to the second half of, even though his numbers in 2017 in totality, 215, 26 home runs, 61 RB. A bad year, but it still looks somewhat competent. Look at the second half of 2017, and you really see where this thing has just, it was falling off a cliff then, and then I don't even know what you described last year as being. That was, it was historic. So I don't know if it's another 1,000 at-bats. He's certainly going to go north with the club. They're not going to do it in spring training.
You believe that? If he hits 128 in spring training, they're going to bring him north and give him and put him in the lineup?
Unless they make up an injury or something like that, and maybe
Why
they will.
Wouldn't they just get rid of him now? I'm not being a jerk. They're not winning. They're not winning with him. They're not winning without him. They're not getting any value out of him. They're going to have to pay him. They've been wrangling their arms. Apparently the old man's, off eating pudding and not a part of this anymore. And so who's making the decision here? To your point, if Elias is really running the place and Elias ain't paying him anyway, then that's the end. Then you don't have to bring him north and watch him get booed and watch him scuffle around for the 4,800 people that are going to go out there when it's 42 degrees and watch him get their ass beat by whomever in the second week of the season. So he comes up and he hits 180, and that's an improvement, and you say, well, at some point he'll hit 220? I don't know. And it's not about average. I'm talking like an old guy now with batting average and whatnot, but it really is about why give him these at-bats? And I also think, why give Cobb the ball? Why give Cashner the ball? I guess you give them the ball in an effort to try to deal them in July, right? That's the strategy here.
And you still have to play the games. You still have innings that you have to pitch. You can't just turn it over to all young guys.
That's right. They are charging major league prices.
There has to be a little bit of that. And look, that's not to say that Andrew Cashner and Alex Cobb are going to make them markedly better to the point where they're not the worst team in baseball, most likely. But you do need to have some semblance of stability. Now, Chris Davis doesn't fall into that category because you can make the argument, based on what we saw in 2018, that you could send Ryan Mountcastle to the major leagues now, and he might hit better than Chris Davis. And that's with Mountcastle having not played above Double-A. He probably would hit better than Chris Davis, in fact. I'm being a little insulting to Mountcastle's ability in that regard. But I do want to go back to what you said about, if Elias is truly in charge. I don't think there's an organization in professional sports that would have a $100 million contract, which they're on the books for at this point, 4 years remaining, that they're not going to have to get ownership approval to move on from that. Now, that said, who will make that decision? That's a very fair point, and I don't think they're there yet. I think you do, at the very least, see if some of the adjustments with new eyes and analytics and new ways of thinking about things can figure out something with Chris Davis, but it does become a case of how far down the road are you going at this point. You can say you're not blocking Ryan Mountcastle right now, and I'll buy that because he hasn't hit at Triple-A yet. And you give him some time at the minor league level to adjust to what's presumably going to be his new position. But if he's ready, say August, and I don't know, you dealt Mark Trumbo, you've gotten Trey Mancini out of the outfield, maybe Austin Hayes is your new starting left fielder. So you get to a point where DH and first base, one of them is going to be Trey Mancini, and if Ryan Mountcastle's ready at that point, and Chris Davis is hitting like he hit last year and has hit so far this spring, then you do make the argument that you're not helping yourself in the long run. I mean, just to get rid of them, just for the sake of getting rid of them and not having a real viable, and I'm not talking putting Renato Nunez at first base. I'm talking about a legitimate prospect, someone that you think is going to be a legitimate major leaguer for you over the next 5 or 6 years. When you're in the position where you have that person ready to go, then I think this becomes a case of what exactly are you doing? You're not going to be able to move his contract. No one's taking the guy. He's not hitting even 200. Then, whenever that might be, whether it might be as early as May, who knows? Then I think that's when you become, much more in a case of what the heck are we doing here? What are we trying to accomplish? You have to pay him either way. I'm fine with having him, trying to see if you can figure this out in some small mindset of recovery that he's a little bit better. But at some point in time, whether it's Mountcastle being ready or someone else that comes along, you're going to be in a position where you're paying this guy and you have options that are A, younger, B, better, C, cheaper, that are being blocked by this contract if you're not going to just be willing to bite the bullet and move on at some point here, probably in the not-too-distant future.
He is Luke Jones. He is Baltimore Luke on Twitter and Luke at WNST.net. All of our WNST coverage brought to you by our friends at Cole Roofing, sponsor of our community and charity series. 100 years now for Bill Cole and his troops. You'll be hearing him a little later on in the week as he provides therapy for me, but don't ever let it goof up on your roof. You got a corporate commercial roof space. If you're interested in solar for your company and how it saves you money, they're there for you with the Gordian system as well as Cole Roofing. They've been there 100 years. You can learn more at ColeRoofing.com. Also, the Maryland Jockey Club getting ready for Preakness, and I know there's been a lot of conjecture. I'm reaching out to the folks at the track. We're going to be talking a lot about this in the coming weeks here. We get a lot of issues in the city, in the state. Preakness is going to be on the agenda here as we get into the spring. And, of course, all of the entries up at WNST.net each and every day, including in our morning newspaper, all brought to you by the Maryland Jockey Club. They are open. They are racing, and we are just a few weeks away now. Derby preps are all up. Triple Crown getting ready. Bob Baffert's got horses. We'll be focused on the horse racing industry. And, of course, they are racing at Laurel. You can learn more at the front of WNST.net. Also, Planet Fitness, $5 down, $10 a month. Never a commitment there, and it's always judgment-free. There's a Planet Fitness there's a Planet Fitness 2 blocks from where I live. I know there's one right around the corner from where you are. Learn more at planetfitness.com. We appreciate them supporting our morning newspaper as well. Luke, the Bryce Harper thing. Chris Davis, Bryce Davis. I'm mixing Manny Machado. There are no other Machados here, but this is washed out differently than any of us would have thought earlier on, right? What it's going to mean for the Trout deal, where everyone else falls in. Adam Jones. I mean, we can go down the list here of all the things, but the Bryce Harper thing fell, and they still wind up getting $330 million, lifetime deals, all of that stuff. But doing it in March, I still wonder where the benefit would have been for baseball to get this stuff done in December and January on these guys. It's not like anybody got any discount. You know what I mean? These guys wound up getting the money we thought they were going to get, kind of, sort of, right?
Yeah, but, and I've said this to you before, let's also consider Scott Boras has notoriously had his clients sign later and later. And this goes back, you can go back even 6 or 7 years ago when he was having his prime premier free agents sign in January as opposed to November or December. And then it trickled into the very beginning of February and now, as you mentioned, into March. And, I mean, is it ideal? No. Is it as big of a deal for a position player as a pitcher? Probably not. I think we saw firsthand with Alex Cobb last year how much it really look at his first half compared to his second half. His second half, look at his ERA. It was very much in line with the kind of pitcher he's been when he's been at his best. So I think it's certainly detrimental when you're talking about guys like Dallas Keuchel and Craig Kimbrell, who still looking for jobs as we're into the first week of March. But in the case of Harper, there is a sense of everyone dragging their feet. I mean, everyone's trying to blink. I think it is unique in the sense that he signed a 13-year deal with no opt-out. I mean, I don't think anyone would have predicted that, even if you can kind of look at the 300-plus million and say, okay, well, we kind of thought that. So in that regard, maybe it is a little bit more unique, but the two 26-year-old free agents that were supposed to completely change the dynamics, I guess they did to some level, but at the same time, you look at the average annual value for Harper, certainly didn't set any records there. He set a record for total value of the deal, I suppose. And in the case of Machado, got 10 years, and he got his opt-out after 5 years. So it's so tough because you brought up Adam Jones and other individuals who are still looking for jobs. I thought all along, Machado and Harper are such a different animal than talking about these 30-somethings on the free agent market. It's just such a different dynamic talking about those two. If you're not going to invest a long-term deal in Manny Machado or Bryce Harper, you're not going to do that with anyone anymore. That's as good as it sets up to be.
Well, it's like Harper said, there's plenty of money in the game. We're the players. Either I'm getting the money or John Angelos is getting it. That's literally where it's at this point because there's so much money there. And, I've been talking about this my whole life, Luke. I've dedicated my life to talking about baseball and money and strikes and how they've affected me and how the baseball teams affected me and building the stadium and all that. And we've seen the money get outrageous now with these TV networks where there's not even any goodwill. They don't even put the spring training games on, and they're fleecing you for $200 million worth of money every year. At every turn, the owners have always tried to screw the players, especially over the color of their skin 60, 70 years ago. Then it was, we went through Frank Robinson and Luis Aparicio and Steve Carlton, so as much as there was racism, it really was just about money. The color was green. It wasn't black or white or Latin or anything like that. And now in the modern era, even the best players, that even though all the money's there and the Phillies owner's the only outlier that said, I've got all this money, and he shot off his mouth for years about signing them both, and we've got to have winners, and then they go and sell all these tickets up in Philadelphia. And it's fascinating for me, Luke, being here in the middle of it, where Washington never had a team, and now Philadelphia always had a team, and they had the Fanatic, and you sat in my office last week touching all the mementos of going to see Doc Gooden pitch and going to see Hershiser pitch and Fernando Mania. That was 30 years ago, and now the Phillies are trying to win, and the Phillies have won, and the Phillies won a World Series and chased another one in this century, and they're trying to become a baseball town and a place where you support the 76ers. I've got tons of Flyers friends. Everybody's an Eagles fan up there. And the Phillies, much like in Boston, right, where there is real competition with the Patriots, the Celtics, and much like in New York, where the Yankees and the Mets and the Rangers and the Islanders, all that stuff goes on, the Phillies have said, we need to win. We can't do this. We're going to win 55 games. We played that game, and they've gone all in on Arrieta. The Phillies are going to be a significant franchise here over the next 5 years, and they've said to their fan base in the aftermath of the Eagles having a parade and the Sixers tanking and now trying, and the Flyers still, and I love it, 45 years later having not hoisted the chalice, that the Phillies have said we're in. And competition is good in America, right?
Sure.
It's good when you have to say we want to win, as opposed to what these clowns that run our baseball team have said, which is, hey, Manny, we don't need you. Go off and we'll get a bag of baseballs and use Nal Diaz for you because we don't know how to run our franchise. I got to hand it to the Phillies. They're making people in Harford County want to get in their car and go up there 3 or 4 times this year. You know what I mean?
Sure, but let's also realize that there's some legitimate risk involved with that too, because
we have Chris Davis. We spent the first 15 minutes.
Exactly. So there's the bad side to it, but your point is well taken. And in the case of the Phillies, let's not pretend that the Phillies came out of nowhere in the regard of spending money. Go back to what their payroll was 7 or 8 years ago on the tail end of winning a championship and getting to another World Series. They were very expensive at a point where their competitive window had closed. They were the Orioles last year, except they didn't have a historically poor 115 loss type season. They were just really expensive and not very good anymore, playing out the string with Ryan Howard and guys like that. But your point is, it's on in the sense that you saw what the tickets, individual tickets that they sold over the weekend when the news came out that they signed Harper. I think it's a really interesting contract in the sense of its length. I mean, my goodness, I'll be nearly 50 years old when that deal was done. That was one of the big things that I took away when you just envision how old you'll be when that deal comes off the books in Philadelphia, and it blows you away. But I thought what was interesting about it, because you kind of look at it in comparison to Machado. Machado has the higher annual average annual value and has the opt-out. Machado's making $30 million per year, can get out of it after 5 years if he wants to. In the case of Harper, you kind of look at 10 years, $300 million compared to 13 years, $330 million, but you look at it from his standpoint and say, all right, 10 years from now when I'm 36 years old, based on what the market looks like now, and understanding that this thing's going to change, I think you're going to see baseball really revamp its economic system. We might need a work stoppage in order for that to happen, but I think you're going to see it. You're going to see younger players get their bite at the apple much more than they are under this current system where they're arbitration 3 years, club control for 6 years. I think you're going to see all that revamped. But if you're Bryce Harper and you say, all right, I could take 10 years, $300 million, but at age 36, am I likely to get a 3-year, $30 million contract? Unless things change dramatically? No way. He's not going to get that. So from his standpoint, got the extra $30 million, 3 extra years, and if he's truly bought into being in Philly, and apparently he is because he has no opt-out, has a no trade, then...
He wants to bring a parade to D.C. I heard that.
Yeah, right. I did think that was pretty funty.
Oh, my God.
Yeah, I mean that's like the whole want to get away thing.
But, hello, Detroit. Oh, we're in Cleveland. Springsteen
exactly,
did that one night, by the way. You know that, right?
But I just thought it was interesting in that regard, and in how the deal came to be, and it could end up being great for Philadelphia. I mean, heck, let's say the Phillies win 2 World Series in the next 6 or 7 years, and by the way, there's a lot of speculation that with them doing this deal and keeping the average annual value to within I say within reason. I mean, he's still making a ton of money per season. There's a lot of people that think the Phillies have kept themselves in position to go sign Mike Trout in a couple years, which would be insane, and that's been the big rumor and talked about story for so long, given where he's from. But
we're never going to hear Manny Machado again. He's just gone, right?
Well, I mean, unless the Padres win a World Series, then you'll hear about him. It's interesting in that regard. It's certainly not a market that's on the forefront of what we pay attention to, but that's East Coast bias. That's West Coast when you're talking about a team that hasn't exactly been relevant at any point other than for a brief time when Tony Gwynn was there. So
be nice to my Padres now. Come on.
Oh no, I think the Padres are going to be a team that's going to be. I think people are going to be talking about them. I think their farm system is superb, and I think as much as we kind of looked at Atlanta this past year, I think the Padres have a chance to do that in the next year or two, where they're bad, and then oh wow, they're pretty darn good, and it kind of comes out of nowhere. I think you could see that, maybe not this year, but I think you could see that next year.
Well, I hope so. I mean, I have a closet full of stuff, and,
sure.
Give me something to root for. But the halfway to Christmas celebration on June 25th, it'd be interesting to see how the fans here are going to treat Manny on the backside of, they gave Teixeira a hard time around here, but I'm wondering whether people will come out in the middle of June. By then, the Orioles will be 23 and 49, or whatever it'll be at that point, and there are 2 games that Manny Machado is going to have to come here and play baseball. So if he was trying to avoid Baltimore, you'll be able to do that. This will be your only chance to see Manny for a long time in Baltimore. Yeah, I mean that's I guess that's the one silver lining of him leaving. Knowing he was going to leave as much as that was a foregone conclusion over the last couple years at least.
that he didn't go to New York, he didn't go to Boston. You're not going to see him on a regular basis in that regard. But, yeah, he'll come back, and he made the comments to Sports Illustrated, which I think a lot of people just blew out of proportion. I think that was much more him talking about the organization than any knock on the city of Baltimore, as many people tried to interpret it. But we'll see how this works out for either of these guys. I mean, if San Diego gets to a World Series or wins a World Series, and let's say he even opts out, that'll be money well spent. And in the case of Harper, even if by age 36 or age 34, that becomes a Ryan Howard, Chris Davis kind of deal by then. Well, if they win one or two World Series in the meantime, I think Philadelphia fans, they won't admit it, and they'll be grumpy and curmudgeon and miserable at that point in time. But looking back at it, they'll say it's well worth it if they win. So, hey, trying to win and trying to put a good product out there, and that's something that is very much lost in today's baseball. As much as we're pointing to analytics and the reality, and let's be clear about this. Some of these players that are out on the market, and even an Adam Jones, and I'm a big Adam Jones guy, but a lot of teams are being smart from the standpoint of they've realized that they can spend far less on younger players, and the key is those younger players are just as productive as these plus 30s. So there is some just intellectual evolution going on here. At the same time, that needs to be corrected then in the sense that players still need to be getting their fair share, and maybe it just needs to be reallocated now. Maybe it's going to be that younger players get more money faster, and then if that happens, guess what will happen? Those plus 30s will look a little bit more attractive because all of a sudden that 25-year-old superstar that you were paying nothing is suddenly making a ton of money, or he's hitting the open market, and then you'll go back to that 31-year-old and say, well, you know what? Maybe we can win with you too, and then we'll see this thing corrected. But to get to that point, again, I'm not so sure we're not going to be talking about a work stoppage. We'll see. I mean,
that's already started. We got work stoppage. We got pitch clock. We got money. We got players getting screwed. We got Adam Jones that can't get a job, right? Who else, by the way? I mean, I don't mean to be a jerk, but I've been doing Baltimore Positive. I've been watching basketball and studying up on other things in the combine. Who else like Adam Jones doesn't have a gig?
Like him. I can't. It's tough for me to speak to that. I don't have that list in front of me.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I'm just wondering who else is floating around without a gig in the middle of March.
Dallas Keuchel's still out there. I mean, Craig Kimbrell's still out there. I mean, there are other players of a similar ilk to Jones that are still out there.
Well, we talk so much about Harper and Machado when it's the middle of March, and we finally got them done. Now I'm thinking Adam Jones isn't done, but I knew he wasn't the only one, right?
And that's the thing for me. I mean,
I'm in Baltimore. We don't sign free agents. I don't need to keep up with that stuff.
Even in the case of Harper and Machado, and even though Machado is not a Scott Boras guy, but this was very much an arms race kind of deal of who was going to blink first.
Well, when you're setting the top of the market, you have to set the top. If you're Scott Boras,
sure.
You don't go in early, you go in late. And he's always done that.
But I've seen some people, even people whose opinions I typically respect, that have talked about how much money these two guys have gotten, and then they've said, well, this kind of shows that there isn't anything wrong with the market. I said, these guys are exceptions to the norm. Manny Machado was always going to get a ton of money. It was just going to be whether it was $270, $300, or $330 million. Same with Bryce Harper. They were always going to get paid. It was a matter of when. And in the case of Scott Boras, I'm not remotely surprised that it took as long as it did. And in the case of Machado and his representation, they're trying to one-up, and it became a game of chicken. Who was going to take a deal first? Who was going to get what they wanted first? And then how was the other player and his representation going to react, and then how are other teams going to react? So those are really bad examples to really assess the overall health or lack thereof of this market. Like I said, for me it comes down to this. If you don't want to pay plus 30s because they're bad investments, and in many cases they are bad investments, to be very fair, that's fine. Well, then that piece of the pie that their share of the pie needs to be reallocated then towards the players that you are truly valuing, and that is the 34 or 24, 25, 26, 27-year-olds who are worth so much in terms of value and are being paid so little.
Well, I mean, they loved paying Machado nothing. They could have given the $161 million to him at the time.
Sure.
He would have been glad to take it and say, all right, add $40 million a year, add 4 years onto the deal, fine, let's go. You know what I mean? Like, that's kind of how it would have looked 4 years ago. And look, with Machado, with the knees and with Johnny Hustle and all of that, you can almost talk me into they shouldn't have signed him. But now that he's gone and they stink, and other teams have valued him, especially another team like the Padres. The Padres had $30 million to give him. The Angelos family had $30 million they could have given him, and it does come back to decision making. Look, I want to get the pitch clock. I want to do all that. We'll do all that later on in the week. It's spring training. We have another month. They're still going to stink, and Bryce Harper's still going to be a Philly and bringing a parade to D.C., and we're still going to have fun at his expense because that's what we do. Luke can be found, Luke at WNST.net, and Baltimore Luke out on Twitter as well. We'll continue baseball, basketball with the Terps. Obviously, if you get a WNST text from our friends at Coons Ford Security Boulevard, probably going to be Raven-related here in the coming weeks as we're up on signings and C.J. Mosley and where we are with free agents and the backside of all things Indianapolis. And Luke and I managed to skip that last week, so I'm off to a good start this year. Nasty at WNST.net finds me. Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Snapchat, Instagram, streaming live right here on our Facebook as well as our YouTube WNSTV channel. We are WNST.net, AM 1570, and WNST, Towson, Baltimore, and we never stop talking Baltimore sports.